Final Fantasy VII is considered by many to be one of the greatest games of all time. It makes perfect sense then that a modern day remake of said game has also quickly become one of the most divisive projects in modern gaming. Some see the remake trilogy as the new greatest game of all time. Some more old school fans hate the project with a burning passion, and some kind of float in between, which is kind of where I would place myself. As you listen to this video, be sure to go down to the comments and tell me which camp you're in. I am genuinely curious with the ratio and how that'll look, because it's just that all over the place. You've probably heard the recent news that the second part of the trilogy, Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, is underperforming in sales big time, and there are a lot of videos out there talking about why that may be, so I'm not going to go into all of that here. One major theory, though, is that players were turned off by what they ended up doing with the story. There was a lot I loved about Final Fantasy VII Remake, and especially Rebirth, but the story changes are absolutely my major beef with the games as well, so that's what I'm going to be diving into today, but from a slightly different approach. I mention it on the channel occasionally, but if you don't know, I am an author with 4 books published, 3 of which are a fantasy trilogy. Now please understand, I'm not claiming to be one of the greatest writers of all time, I'm not a New York Times bestseller, though I have been on other bestseller lists. What I am saying, however, is that I do know a thing or two about what makes a good story tick. I've taught classes at many writers' conferences to both new and experienced authors on things like building 3-dimensional characters, structuring plot, etc. As I mentioned earlier, my take on Final Fantasy VII Remake trilogy is a mixed bag. I thought Remake was fine. I thought Rebirth was amazing, with a few major caveats to both, all revolving around that freaking storyline. To avoid talking for hours about this, what I'm going to do is break down why the story of Final Fantasy VII Remake is so broken by looking at 3 major underlying principles from a writer/author perspective. Those 3 principles are the Implicit Promise, selfish storytelling, and Nullified Stakes. Yum. In the end, you'll see that all 3 of these are actually related to just one core problem the game has, and that, in my humble opinion, breaking these principles greatly damaged Final Fantasy VII Remake's potential for impact. So you're kind of going to get Plot Writing 101 today as well, so there you go, that one's for free.
It's free real estate.
By the way, this video will contain major spoilers for Final Fantasy VII OG, Final Fantasy VII Remake, and Final Fantasy VII Rebirth. Alright, here we go. Principle number 1, the Implicit Promise. In the writing world, the Implicit Promise is an unspoken commitment you make with the reader. This is usually made right away, like with the cover of the book and the first few pages. What it does is it shows the reader what they are getting themselves into, and that this will be worth their time. Let's use Star Wars A New Hope as a quick example. Looking at the cover, you know right away that George Lucas is promising an epic storyline with cool-looking warriors and weapons, dark villains, and probably outer space dogfights. Well, what do we see in the first scene of the movie? An intergalactic empire led by a sinister-looking dude who commandeers a spaceship after an intense laser battle, who then captures a beautiful and interesting character. That's like the first 10 minutes. It delivers and reinforces the promise made on the cover and continues to do so for the rest of the film. Imagine then if halfway through the movie Han and Leia meet in the Death Star, and from that point forward, the Empire and Jedi subplot kind of fall into the background, and the rest of the movie is a romantic comedy showing Han and Leia going on cute dates, falling in love, and eventually getting married and having babies. Wouldn't you feel disappointed? Betrayed even? Well, why? Because you were promised one thing and you got something else. You were tricked. Oftentimes, writers will justify this sort of thing by saying they wanted to do something that's never been done before, or they really wanted to surprise the reader or make something fresh. Here's the thing though, even if Han and Leia's romantic comedy half of the film is written well, or even if you're one of those rare people that would like both sci-fi and rom-coms, it doesn't matter. The sci-fi fan expected a sci-fi movie because that's what you promised. So back to Final Fantasy VII then. The Implicit Promise is right there in the title, Final Fantasy VII Remake. The marketing, trailers, and even the cover promised an upgraded experience of the one we remember from 1997. And some of Remake delivered on that. I would say a lot of Rebirth did. But peppered throughout, and especially in those horrible last chapters of both games, were unforgivable betrayals of the promise. You thought you were playing your favorite game with a fresh coat of paint, but surprise! You've actually been playing in a self-aware, meta alternate universe.
What? What the?
You were promised to see this or that favorite scene, only to find it being cut or replaced entirely by some new bloated thing. Alright, let's go further down this stuffy, maniacal rabbit hole, shall we? Let's jump to principle number 2. That's going to be selfish storytelling. In my class about writing first drafts, I teach that a first draft is for you as the writer. As part of the creative process, you can put literally anything in that draft that you think is cool. Which is why first drafts are and should be a total mess and never see the light of day. It's for getting ideas on the page and then stepping back to figure out as the writer what you actually want the story to be. The final draft, however, needs to be for the audience. It needs to be a product that people can enjoy to the fullest in exchange for their hard-earned cash and their time. That's why between first and final draft, there's a huge process of revision and editing where you yank out entire subplots that don't belong, delete or combine characters, and get rid of anything that hinders the effectiveness of the story. This often drastically changes what you started with. The problem with Final Fantasy VII Remake is this guy. Tetsuya Nomura cares more about his weird ideas than the player's enjoyment. I really think that. I personally think that his original version of Final Fantasy VII was kind of a lightning in a bottle situation because two things kept him from derailing. Number one, limitations of the PlayStation 1, and number two, the authority figures that were around him in his early career that kind of limited his creative freedom. I may get heat for this in the comments, but I really think Final Fantasy VII Remake project, and other of his projects like Kingdom Hearts, show that he's not that great of a writer. Having great creative ideas, which he certainly does, nobody's denying that, and fleshing them out on paper are two entirely different skill sets. The whole multiverse thing he seems to love so much, with alternate realities and multiple universe-jumping Sephiroths and plot ghosts, etc., may have been fun to experiment with in early concept phases, but in my opinion, should definitely have been left on the cutting room floor. Plots like this have infected all of our favorite things like Marvel, DC, Star Wars, and dozens of other franchises. It's just lazy storytelling that takes a potentially awesome plot and turns it into an unnecessarily convoluted and nonsensical mess really quickly. A major side effect of this is leaving players in the dust with a storyline that makes them feel frustrated, or even stupid, for not understanding and not being able to follow. Instead of being in the moment with the characters and their emotions, it forces us to break immersion and step out of the story in order to unravel a tangled plot slinky, instead of sitting back and enjoying it.
Isn't this incredible? Everyone loves a slinky. You gotta get a slinky, 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 go, slinky, go!
Alright, let's talk about the other side effect of a convoluted plot like this, and that's principle number 3, Nullified Stakes. Yum. A great story is made up really of only two key elements, character and conflict. You give us someone interesting to look at and care about, and then you throw them into a conflict with stakes. This can be as dramatic as a lovable hobbit like Frodo Baggins needing to evacuate his home with an evil relic in his pocket, or as silly as nerdy Napoleon Dynamite's annoying uncle suddenly moving in with him. Both are interesting characters and both have something to lose. Frodo could be caught and killed. Napoleon could end up going to the school dance alone. So what if right at the beginning of the movie, Gandalf put a spell on Frodo that made him invincible? Or what if Napoleon was a hunky, charming football captain instead of a nerd? The stakes would disappear and we no longer care. Final Fantasy VII Remake's multiverse-type story does this all the time. Remember that scene in the original where the Sector 7 plate is about to fall? Wedge literally jumps to his death. Big's dying body is hanging limp over a rail, and Jessie is further up, just on her last breath in the middle of the stairs, lamenting how the actions of Avalanche cost too many lives. It's an effective and shocking moment in the game. In the remake, Jessie does still appear to die, so that's good, but Wedge cheats death with comedic antics, Biggs dies but then is magically alive somehow at the end. What about Zack's tragic death? You know, the one where he's pumped full of lead from 2 fully automatic assault rifles at point-blank range? Nah, he's good. He Captain America's through the whole thing and lives too. What about the brand new shocker of a plot twist when Barrett is actually run through and killed by Sephiroth? No worries, he's brought back to life by literal plot ghosts 3 minutes later. Now, you could argue that these fake-outs are reversed later. Both Wedge and Biggs are shown to die in Rebirth, which I was very grateful for. You could also argue that Zack did die too in that timeline or whatever, but none of that matters because the damage is already done. The player missed the chance to be emotionally affected by the big moments, and more importantly, is no longer worried about the characters because subconsciously they now know that death, or any other important plot twist, doesn't really matter because anything can happen. Nothing is permanent in a world with no rules and no consistency, which is exactly what plot gimmicks like this are. The biggest example of this flaw is in the way they handled one of the most famous scenes in gaming history. That would of course be Aerith's death. Going into Rebirth, I thought the 2 choices were that A, they either kill her like they should in an emotionally harrowing moment, or B, keep her alive in some dumb new way. Somehow they did the impossible and found door number 3, which was to make her die as she should, and yet still steal all the emotional impact by intentionally confusing the player with Cloud's unreliable narrative subplot, and even let you see her and control her in a boss battle just a few minutes later. My guess is that we'll see the true moment of death in Game 3 when Cloud is brought back to his senses by Tifa, but by then, who cares? We've had years to get over it at that point. In conclusion, I'm completely fine with taking the old and expanding it for a remake. In fact, it would be a missed opportunity not to do so. I know there's a lot of negativity in this video, but I really did enjoy exploring an expanded Midgar and meeting logical additions like Marl. I loved hearing more backstory to the Avalanche members. I loved the new takes on combat, and especially playing Queen's Blood, because it all simply builds on and enhances what was already there. I seriously enjoyed Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, which I thought was extremely faithful to the original game, until the last few chapters took off into freaking La La Land. All this garbage with parallel dimensions and Zack teaming up with Cloud to fight 16 versions of Genova's stepmom on the surface of Mars, it all just detracts and distracts from the elements that are truly important. In other words, all of my qualms with the remake storyline, everything I've talked about in this video boils down to the one root cause of the cancerous multiverse mechanic. It's literally the same plot device we used as kids in an attempt for a great twist. And then he woke up, and it was all just a dream. The end. What we're left with then is a game that's kind of for nobody. Nobody wins. OG fans like myself get robbed of key moments and faithful characters, and newcomers are left confused and frustrated because they're missing the lore required to understand the new changes. Square Enix and Nomura, I feel, tried to cater to both audiences, and it just ended up being broken. I'm hoping the last installment in the trilogy is as faithful as Rebirth was, because again, I really loved playing through that. I am genuinely looking forward to Part 3. I'm confident it's going to be a great time, but I hope they can just rein it in and stick the landing. But at this point, my expectations for that are pretty low. I feel we're at a point of no return where they've written themselves too far into a corner to tie everything up in a clean, satisfying way. I guess time will tell. And please, Square Enix, I'm begging you, be smarter with that rumored Final Fantasy IX remake. Please, I'm begging you, don't do anything stupid. Anyway, tell me all your thoughts down in the comments below. There's a lot of opinions about how these games ended up turning out, and I would love to hear what your thoughts are. Do you agree with me? Do you strongly disagree? I don't think there's a right or wrong answer here. It's all in the eye of the beholder, but either way, I'm looking forward to hearing you guys' thoughts down below. I'll also say, if you're among the 97% of unsubscribed viewers, I would love it if you would check out some of my other videos, Final Fantasy, retro gaming, all that good stuff. If you like what you see, subscribing and turning on the notifications bell is free for you, and it's like leaving a $100 tip at my metaphorical YouTube dining table. Thank you so much for watching, and I will catch you either in my next video or one of my Monday, Wednesday, or Friday live streams. Have a good one.